Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest iteration of the web series, Wearing Power Armor to a Magic School. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 6, Tainted Promises. Everyone remained completely fixated on me as I marched back towards my seat with loud, unwieldy steps. Each clack of unyielding metal on hardened granite resonated across a room that seemed purposely made to amplify every sound within it. I could practically hear the microservos and actuators as they whirred and whizzed, accompanying each and every one of my steps. It felt like an entire world had paused just so that everyone could gawk as I retook my seat and carefully shuffled back into place. Indeed, it was only after I sat back down did Manathayria continue his announcements, his words, however, falling on deaf ears, as not a single soul wished to remove their piercing gaze from my suited form. While everyone might have seen a stoic, unflinching, unmoving hulk of a being, completely unbothered and unfazed by the events that had transpired, things actually couldn't be any further from the truth. I was practically melting inside the suit, even with the coolant systems on full blast, even with my rear-facing and side-view cameras turned off. I still couldn't shake that gut-churning feeling of being an unwanted center of attention. My whole body shook with the same feeling you'd get after completely making an ass of yourself at some important social function. It was maddening and all-consuming. My spiral into the pits of utter dread was just about to take another leap. If it wasn't for a rogue sensation on my hand, it was the unmistakable feeling of another person's touch being transmitted via my gloves and into the undersuit beneath it. I could feel a reassuring squeeze and the slightest bit of tickling from the feather-covered appendage, which immediately clued me into just exactly who it was that extended this gesture of solidarity. A gesture so sorely needed when the entire world seemed more than willing to distance itself from me. "Emma, don't focus on anything else. Just look at me, all right?" Thassia whispered softly, which was more than enough for my audio suite to enhance and isolate, as I dialed out all other sounds around the room to zero in on this one single point of focus. I could only nod in response as to my two opaque lenses stared back at the avian unflinchingly. Yet despite what most would have seen as an unfeeling eyes of suit of armor, as Eleanor had pointed out, it was clear that she saw something else. It almost felt as if she was actually looking at me, making actual eye contact, rather than just seeing me for the helmet and lenses, which would have been a far easier thing to do. It was then that I wished I could have detinted the damned lenses to actually make eye contact. I knew that it felt like I was doing just that, but I wasn't, and worst of all, I couldn't. All Thassia could see right now were the two unfeeling lenses, and I hated that. Despite all the training I received, and that trial runs they put me through, nothing could have prepared me for what was effectively a new life in an entirely alien skin. A skin that had everything I needed to survive, and then some, but one that brought with it unforeseen limitations that were only now being felt. "It's over now," Thassia continued, her hand squeezing my own once again, as I suddenly felt a strange warmth flooding over me. "Localized surge of mana radiation detected, 120% above background radiation levels. And from what I can tell, you somehow managed to survive the binding ceremony. I'm relieved, Emma. I really am." Her voice sounded genuine, and for the briefest of moments, I could swear that I could see her royal facade yielding, even if it was just for those precious few seconds. A quick glance from Salman, however, seemed to have shifted the mood once more, as the princess slowly pulled her hands away from me, managing to maintain that warm avian smile that slowly but surely transitioned back into the reserved, polite facade from just moments prior. "I'm just, very glad that you're all right, Emma." "Thank you," I finally managed out through my vocoder, as the princess tilted her head forward in response, in a way that only a royal could. "Anytime," she whispered back, before the next roster of names were called up in a group of 20 students, with Eleanor being the last on the list. The grand reception hall, Eleanor point of view. There wasn't much that diminutive lizard could do now to prepare for what was inevitable. No amount of searching, rummaging, or double-checking could help, not when he knew when and where exactly his amulet had gone missing. I shouldn't have gone to that infernal Seven Sideway. Sneaking off to watch the Earthrealmer's arrival wasn't worth it. Begging wouldn't do him any favors either, as it was clear that those that weren't prepared for the ceremony were all unceremoniously brought up like lambs to the slaughter, regardless of their rank and station. It was the Earthrealmer's fault, he knew it. It was because of her that the year had been singled out like this. Yet, despite being new, despite not knowing the ways of the Academy, she'd still managed to evade being bound. This fact infuriated him far more than he would have ever been willing to admit. With his fate now uncertain, Eleanor could only look on as his time as a free soul whittled away, as he saw student after student consumed one after another by the book, that damned infernal artifact finally getting its fill, with his soul next on the line for the chopping block. "Lord Eleanor," the expressionless voice echoed around Venurian, causing him to flick his head around in an attempt to determine its source. You are to make your way to the coat room immediately. There you'll find what you seek. The faculty will not interfere with your temporary absence for the short duration, but you must make haste, lest you miss the golden opportunity. The voice warned, prompting the Venurian to turn around to everyone at the table. Not a single soul present seemed to have reacted to that voice, indicating to him that it was indeed a telepathic voice of some third party, a third party that had some serious sway given the magic involved in direct mental communication. "I'll be right back. I just need to use the washroom." Eleanor scooted backwards, promptly excusing himself, much to the confused expressions of everyone at the table. Can he do that?" Emma required, with the only response from the table being Thalman's disinterested shrug. The coat room, Eleanor. Everyone knew where it was. Everyone used its services, but no magic user, student, faculty, staff, or otherwise, would ever stoop to such a low as to enter the doors to muddy themselves with the servants that lie therein. The room was just adjacent to the grand hall, across in a small unmarked corridor and rarely trafficked by anyone that didn't explicitly require the services of a servant. The air inside was hot, heavy, and humid. The acrid smells of harsh alchemical cleaning potions and artificed steam implements dominated the air, all byproducts of an unwavering need for coats and cloaks to be made wrinkle-free in between classes and scheduled activities. Eleanor could see several of the lesser elven slaves as they marched back and forth, lugging cartload after cartload of supplies and cloaks alike. The sight alone made him gag in disgust. He stood there for a minute, waiting and panting in place as the heat slowly got to him. Whoever this other person was, they were making it clear just who was in control here. It was a power move to make him wait in a place like this, even more so with time rapidly running out in the grand hall. Yet, just as he felt his time was dwindling into nothing, and just as his anxieties were ready to peak, he heard a muffled, purposeful cough, one that beckoned him forwards towards an empty clearing in a sea of moving clothes, meeting face to face with the last person he expected to see behind all of this, a lowly lesser elf, a creature that, despite the Venurian's own height challenged stature, was barely able his waist, dressed in nothing but what amounted to worn-out potato sack, draping and concealing a frail, emaciated body. The lesser elf looked as if he could be blown away by the smallest gust of wind. "What is the meaning of this?" "Master Eleanor Relaria," the lesser elf spoke, cutting the Venurian off in his tracks. "I have what you seek." The slave quickly rummaged through his hole-ridden rucksack, producing an item that was probably worth 100, maybe even 1,000 of his kin, a medallion encrusted with a diamond and sapphire that formed the centerpiece of a dazzling gold and silver bracelet. The Venerian reached for it instinctively, only to have the object of his desires pulled away from him, holding on to the amulet. With a vice-like grip, the slave shot him a glare that could only be described as predatory in nature. This completely threw Eleanor off guard, as the slave took the opportunity to continue unchallenged. "Patience, master. A Venurian such as your caliber should understand that every exchange is a transaction, is it not?" The slave shot back with the slightest hint of a cocky, confident inflection, clashing harshly with the otherwise submissive, disheveled appearance. "Are you trying to extort me with my own possessions, slave?" Eleanor finally shot back, a hiss present in his voice as he stepped forward, attempting to reassert himself in the conversation. No, of course not, Master. I'm simply an arbiter returning a misplaced item. It is not I who wishes for this transaction, the slave retorted, standing perfectly still with his back completely straight, a rare, if not entirely unheard of sight, which sent shivers down the Villenarian's back. Then who in the name of the gods or goddesses is your puppet master? I demand to know, Eleanor managed out, in between a nervous tick and an enraged hiss. I am not privy to disclose that information, Master. I am, however, pressed to inform you that you have less than 1 minute to agree to the terms set forth. A quick glance at the manner-based timepiece within Eleanor's coat pocket confirmed this as he dipped his head down for the briefest of moments. What do you want? Eleanor sighed in defeat. There will be no need for any monetary or physical transactions, merely an agreement, one that you must accept prior to the return of your amulet. The elf produced another object from his rucksack, a small letter sealed with a magical aura, one that, to the elf's credit, could not be opened except for the intended receiver. Is this a letter of binding? Eleanor hissed out, as the elf merely smiled in response. No, it is not. It is merely a letter with terms and agreements that you must agree to if you wish to regain the possession of this amulet. Enough of the game, slave. I accept. Eleanor reached out and snatched both the letter and the amulet from his hands. He expected a wave of magic to wash over him, for the telltale signs of some binding spell to take hold of him, but nothing came. All he felt was a slight aura of the spell of discretion. What was unnerving, however, was how it had been penned and sealed to him so quickly. These things usually take hours, if not a full day to complete. The spell of discretion meant that the contents of the letter were squarely between him and the mysterious benefactor. At least he had comfort knowing that the literal blackmail was confidential matter. He would worry about it later, however, for now he was satisfied, relieved by the fact that he would be spared the loss of his soul to the damned artifact. He tucked the letter into one of his pockets and secured the amulet and its chain to his wrist. Without even glancing back to the slave, he began taking his leave, only for the slave to leave him with a few parting words that echoed throughout the coat-room. I suggest you read that letter post-haste, but should you fail to do so, just know that your most critical task is to keep an eye on the Earth-Realmer. My master shall be in touch, Lord Eleanor. Eleanor didn't wish to pay the slave any more attention than had already been given as he stormed out of the coat-room, sprinting his way back to the grand hall as he tried his very best to not overthink whatever backhanded game he was being forcefully thrust into. Grand Reception Hall, Emma Booker. Right, but I don't understand how my resistance to the soul-binding ceremony is any different from your methods. Because you didn't dispel the binding spell. You resisted it. You resisted it even when it climbed all the way up to tier 19, something that shouldn't be possible. Mana resistance at such a state is unheard of. Everyone else here has amulets of dispelling. It dispels spells in their tracks before it reaches the high enough level to have an effect. Well, you just ignored it. That's it. Dalman responded with a rough whisper, something that I was surprised he was able to do. The man was blunt and clearly didn't mince his words, but I found that spoke more to his good character than anything. I'd rather have a candid and rude partner than a polite but deceptive one any day of the week. What little conversation we did have was cut short by Eleanor's return. His scurrying and scampering made for a welcome break from what was becoming a depressing, morbid repetition of callousness and cruelty. 17 students so far had been processed by the ceremony, and only half of them seemed to have survived intact. I tried prying more out of Thassia and Thelman, but the pair made it clear that talking during the ceremony, especially one that was uncharacteristically timed and aggressive, wasn't the best idea. Eleanor's timely arrival was quickly interrupted, however, by his name being called Venarian. As the Venarian made his way up onto the stage with a renewed sense of confidence that was lacking before he stripped to the washroom. Perhaps he took a swig of liquid courage, or perhaps he found whatever he was looking for. My scanners didn't detect anything new about him, however, but then again, it seemed to have difficulty picking up the magical artifacts that Quiv, Thassia, and Thelman seemed to have on them, these so-called amulets of dispelling. I knew, however, that it would only be a matter of time before I'd be able to sniff out these artifacts more effectively than an E-hound tracking down cargo at a spaceport. It was just a waiting game now. of exposing my EVI to more and more datasets to aggregate and analyze. The intricacies behind the program was way above my pay grade, but the EVI was described to me as a mobile lab, a program whose sole purpose was to make sense of the fantasy around me. It was to constantly monitor, running idly in the background of my suit system like some creepy Uncia-grade software, constantly monitoring every little sensor module the team had tacked onto my suit, as it carved out its observations of the world around me in a way that I just wasn't qualified enough to do. At least, that's what the eggheads back in the IAS told me. Indeed, they had entire lectures on how the suit's deep learning program worked, but a lot of the stuff just flew over my head. I wasn't a computer engineering prodigy, after all, let alone a leading AI specialist. Regardless, what they taught me was at least enough to grasp the basics of it, enough that I would be able to troubleshoot it if anything went wrong. Couple this with the manuals and instruction booklets they downloaded to my local library, and I was confident that when the time did come, I would be able to use this overly engineered program to the best of my abilities. Especially when it came to the potential for sciencing the shit out of this magic business. They explicitly went out of their way to remind me that it wasn't a true AI, however, an understandable distinction to make given how almost everyone was still uneasy about the topic. Especially after what happened during the Charon Innovations incident. AI or not, I was glad that there was at least a backup in the case of a proper line of communication back home wasn't viable. At least this way, there was still some way to scientifically break down the mysteries of this place. I tapped my head a few times to see if the program was running, which of course it was. It had been gathering data from before I even entered the portal. I made sure that it was paying close attention now as I watched Illinois' ceremony commence, and I once again settled into the anxious anticipation to see if we'd be spending the rest of the year with a zombie or the same rude lizard that I'd come to resent. Come to think of it, maybe a soulbound zombie would be marginal improvement for the Venerian. The seconds ticked by as Manathayria repeated the exact same words he had done for the past half an hour or so now. The real test, however, was when Illinois reached for the quill and found it basically impossible to lift. A wave of relief washed over me, but I knew he wasn't out of the woods yet. The diminutive lizard took a few good minutes to slowly lift the quill into the ink bottle, repeating the same scene that Quiff and the other amulet-wielding students had done before, finally ending it with the exact same motions. With a full 5 minutes of struggling just to etch his name into the paper, and a prolonged burst of mana, the lizard had completed the ritual. Looking back at Thassia and Thalman, it was clear that the lizard had done it. Indeed, it became clear to me now that the rest of the ceremony would be a repeat of the same nail-biting experience for every student. However, because our group seemed to all have their amulets at the ready, I rested easy, knowing that we were safe in this whole binding ritual. Indeed, as the hours went by and Thalman's turn was up, it looked as if the whole drama with the ceremony was coming to an end. The Lupinar Prince's ceremony was practically identical to Ulinor's, Quiz, and every other amulet-wielding student. There was no doubt in my mind Thassia would fall into the same pattern. At least, that's what I thought, until the avian stepped up to the plate. The ceremony started out simply enough. Manathayria repeated his vows, and Thassia giving her small little speech on her place here in the academy. It was only when she knelt down to the floor, however, did things start to noticeably shift.
Tainted one, do you understand your presence here defiles the hallowed halls of this great academy? That your vessel acts as a shell for a great evil which lurks within your soul? Do you understand that as your professors we are obliged to act in your best interest, and should you succumb to your evils and vices, we shall have no choice but to strike you down, condemning your soul to eternal captivity within the tainted welts of the Nexus?
My eyes went wide at this, as I was tempted to stand up from my seat, only to have the lupine hold me in place. The man glared at me, forcing me to relent. I could have easily overpowered him, of course, but this entire situation was too sensitive for me to intervene with a simple wave of a pistol. I had to keep watching, but my hand never left the butt of my gun. "I do, Your Grace." Thassia dipped her head low, far lower than any other student had done thus far. So low, in fact, that I could have sworn that she was kissing Manathayria's feet. A feeling of abject disgust filled me.
Then sign your name and be done with this ceremony. Prove to us here and now that the taint has not corrupted your soul,
Mauleroy continued, handing her another quill from within his cloak. The avian complied unquestioningly, and as she touched the quill, a surge of mana radiation bellowed out, causing my alarms to blare with an entirely new warning. Alert! Unstable surge of mana radiation detected, 593% above background radiation levels. Boarding anomaly detected. Recalibrating. Error. Detecting 29 plus 1 distinct types of mana radiation. My eyes grew wide at that as I ripped the datapad from my backpack and began running diagnostics. I ignored the ceremony, ignored the world around me as I rushed to see if it was even possible. The error messages were popping up even now, so I did the only thing I knew might work, a hard reboot. Rebooting, reinitializing, scanning, alert. Unstable surge of mana radiation detected, 795% above background radiation levels. I ran another diagnostics check, which revealed nothing. It was as if the error was just that, an error. There were no anomalies detected, no new mystery mana radiation. That was unaccounted for. I chalked it up to just the system being as new to this place as I was. So there were more than likely plenty of bugs to be had within the code that needed to be patched. At least, that's what I hoped for. As I continued running diagnostic after diagnostic, all reaching the same conclusion. If it had been a new type of radiation, I'd be a pile of liquefied human now, right? That year's ceremony continued, despite my panicked worries, and to my horror, I also saw steam emerging from the stage. Zooming in closer, the steam seemed to have been localized to the hand she currently held the quill with. This wouldn't last for long, however, before she too managed to sign the book. However, similar to my own ceremony, Mauleroy refused to pick up the book to display it back to the crowd. He simply kept it there, as the dean took a good look at it and nodded in approval.
Princess Stasia Delani of the Aetheron realm, henceforth you shall be known as a peer and a ward of the Transgression Academy. Welcome to our ranks, and may the divine guide you aright.
Princess nodded, her whole body shaking as she didn't immediately leave the stage, instead being ushered towards the red-robed professor from before, who casted a spell in her injured hand, which glowed a brilliant green. Localized surge of mana radiation detected, 350% above background radiation levels. The older woman smiled and patted the princess on the head, before wrapping her hand up in a bandage and sending her back to our table. It was clear this entire ordeal had taken a lot out of the princess, so now it'd be my turn to be the one giving her a reassurance she surely needed. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, HenryTheRed, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.